And we are live. Good evening, everyone. My name is Claire. I'm the event coordinator for Village Books in Bellingham and Linden, Washington, and I am so delighted to be here for this event tonight. This is a special one, folks, and I can see in the chat there to the side we already have some familiar names. We're so happy to see you all here. Some things about Crowdcast. If you haven't ever watched a Crowdcast event before, if you look in the upper right-hand corner, there's a green button that says follow. If you click on that follow button, you can see all the events that we have coming down the road. You can also watch past events that we have recorded there, so I encourage you to do that. About the chat, I want to let you know that I am going to disable the chat. I'm just going to do that for the duration of the presentation tonight, and then I'm going to bring it back up in time for the Q&A. So have no fear. I'm disabling it now, but you will be able to chime in later and say hello and congratulations and all that stuff. So if during the course of the event a question occurs to you that you want to ask the author, if you look at the bottom of the screen, you'll see where it says ask a question. You can see there's a number 1 next to it. Someone has actually already used this feature. If you click on ask a question, a little dialog box pops up. You can type in your question, close it, and we will gather all of the questions and address them when we are doing the Q&A portion of the event tonight. So we encourage lots of questions. So again, just click on ask a question, type your question in there, we'll hang on to it, and then we'll get to it towards the end of the presentation this evening. Speaking of upcoming events that I mentioned that we're hosting on Sunday at 4 p.m., we're excited to welcome Dick Cathell. He is presenting his brand new book, The Gift of Becoming. He's going to be in the virtual readings gallery at 4 p.m. on Sunday, so we encourage you to check that one out. All of our Lit Live events in our virtual series so far have been free events. We do have the option. You can pay a small contribution if you like at registration. To those of you who did make a contribution and kicked in a few dollars to support our programming, we really thank you. We appreciate it. It's very helpful. And to those of you who didn't, that's fine too. That's why we like to offer. We're pleased that we can offer free programming. So, but if you did give us a contribution, we appreciate it and thank you. Let's see. Speaking of contributions, this green button right here that says purchase the Donovan diaries here. If you click on that green button, it takes you straight to the Village Books website. If you happen to be watching this event recorded on YouTube, if you look in the description, there is a link directly to the Village Books website where you can purchase a copy of the Donovan diaries and other books by tonight's author. And we encourage you, if you're feeling so inspired this evening, we would love it if you would support the author and an independent bookstore by making a purchase. We will have signed copies. A very special announcement about this particular event is that our author is going to be available tomorrow, Saturday, September 26th, from 12 p.m. to 4 p.m. He is actually going to be at the J.J. Donovan bench in Fairhaven in Bellingham, Washington, on the corner of Harris Avenue and 11th Street. He's going to be there signing copies. It's going to be a socially distant book signing, so we encourage you to swing by the bookstore, purchase a copy of any of his books, because we have all his titles there, and then walk on down the street to the bench, and he will be happy to sign your books. So we can answer more questions about that later if we have them. Okay, now for the fun part. So Brian Griffin is a Bellingham, Washington native. He was born in 1932 at the old St. Joseph's Hospital. He's lived most of his life on the city's South Hill. Educated at the campus school, Bellingham High School, and Whitman College, he has enjoyed a life of rich and varied experiences, much like the featured topic of his book this evening. He's written 3 books about the natural world: The Orchard Mason Bee, Humblebee Bumblebee, and Beulah, his tale of a childhood experience with a pet crow. Long interested in history, The Donovan Diaries is his 5th local history book. The others are My Darling Anna, Boulevard Park, Treasures from the Trunk, and Fairhaven, A History. His civic activities include leading the movements to build the downtown parkade, the Fairhaven Village Green, and Depot Market Square. For many years, he has narrated the Whatcom Museum's Sunset History cruises and remains an active docent at the museum. He was honored with the Living Treasure Award at the Mayor's Arts Award ceremony in 2015. I can't think of anybody who's much more deserving of that award. And at 87, he can still be found on most days in his basement, workshop crafting custom ukuleles that he sells worldwide through his website, griffinukuleles.com. He's here tonight to discuss his brand new book, The Donovan Diaries. Forgive I got a special copy. So that's why it says that right there. He's here tonight to present the Donovan Diaries. I am so delighted to have this conversation with him. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mr. Brian L. Griffin. Hello, sir.
Delighted Hello. To be here.
Well, thank you so much for coming to the Readings Gallery tonight.
Yeah. Strange world, huh?
Yes.
I'm with you kind of through the air, huh?
Yes, exactly. Coming at us through the particles.
Right.
So I just want to, I'm so excited that this is not the first event that I have ever moderated or interviewed. I've done this many times before, but this is the first virtual event that I have gotten to have this role. And so I'm excited. Usually I just do the intro and then I disappear. So I'm excited that I get to participate with you tonight. So can you start off by telling us about the genesis of this book? Why the Donovan Diaries?
Well, I guess that I've always been fascinated by J.J. Donovan. I first heard of him as a kid, and the name Donovan is all over Bellingham. But when I was growing up, one of the major industries was Lodell Donovan Lumber Mills, and there's Donovan Avenue. But more importantly, I used to know a lot of old guys who worked in Donovan's various industries, and they all spoke of him not as a great wealthy owner of an industry, but as a warm, trustworthy, friendly, nice, good man. And I've always been fascinated by J.J. Donovan. So actually this book is the ending of an 8-year-old journey, which started in 2012, okay, when I found at a Sisters of St. Joseph's of Peace convent, a retirement home in Bellevue on Lake Washington, a wonderful old statue that I thought I recognized. It was standing out in the grounds, framed by dark cedar trees, and it's a beautiful white Carrara marble statue of St. Joseph. And I thought, boy, I've seen that before. I took a picture of it with my cell phone. I came back a couple of months later to see the nuns once again. And this time I looked carefully. By that time I had checked, and it was identical to the statue that I remembered as a kid on the State Street entrance, the tunnel entrance to the old St. Joseph's Hospital, where I was born, and where I used to pick up newspapers on a newspaper route. The Herald would dump them right at the entrance to the tunnel, and you'd look up at the statue and think, oh boy, I got to go to work again.
Yeah, it's extraordinary to me that you remembered that, because, okay, so you first saw this statue at the convent how many years later? I mean, the fact that you recognized it
75.
is astonishing. Should we show folks the pictures so that they can see what we're talking about? Okay, so folks, I'm going to, here we go with the technology. I'm going to show you, we have a picture of, and these are actually from the book. Here we go. So this is...
So here it is now.
Right.
Beside the entrance to the present St. Joseph's Hospital. And that was the goal that started all this, getting it back to Bellingham.
Right.
And why did I want to do that? Because on the base, on the back side and on the base are engraved the words, "Gift of J.J. Donovan."
Hmm.
And I learned that JJ had given that statue to the St. Joseph's Hospital in 1928 when they were doing a big expansion and they dug the tunnel into the expansion.
So
So I
let's,
did.
yeah, speaking of
What?
that tunnel, so you want to see it in the original context?
Yeah, show it the way it was set up.
All right. So it's not terribly clear here, but
Show the
there.
other. Yeah,
Okay. You want to see that one?
there we go.
There it is.
And right
So
behind
that's
that,
the tunnel.
that's the tunnel. You see, they wanted to build that hospital on the trolley line. The first St. Joseph's Hospital was up on 17th Street, way too far up on the hill. So this was right between Whatcom and Seaholm,
Hmm.
Whatcom and Fairhaven, and well situated. And JJ gave that statue to commemorate the death of two young grandsons who died as children.
Hmm. Yep.
And when
And
I
so, yeah, this is just gives you the context of, so here's the new, quote unquote, new part of the hospital wing, the wing that was added. And there is the statue.
1928, right?
Yeah. So
And
it's,
on the right
that's,
is the old hospital built in 1910.
yeah. So that's why it's extraordinary to me that you remembered this. So I'm going to
Well,
go ahead and stop the sharing now so that we can there.
okay,
But
so
but uh,
at
but
any
now
rate,
now folks have a visual for what you're talking
so
about.
now I got down on my knees and cleared away the leaves and the twigs, and I saw gift of J.J. Donovan, and I thought, by God, that statue needs to be back at St. Joseph's Hospital in Bellingham, where J.J. gave it.
Yep.
Well, that started it all.
It, like I
So,
say, I still am astonished that you
so
recognized it.
well, so then the question becomes, how in the world do I convince the nuns at the convent to give it up? And I thought, well, it would be, I'd been talking with Patty Leach at the Watkin Museum for some time about the need to have more history exhibitions at the museum and not just art exhibitions. So I thought this would be a perfect uh, headline, a perfect centerpiece for for a history exhibit on the life of the man that I thought and think was the most important man in our history, J.J. Donovan. So I went to Patty Leach, wrote a little proposal, went to Patty, told her about Donovan, and she said, "That's great, let's do it."
Uh,
And so that gave me an excuse to go back and ask for the statue. What I didn't know was that Patty Leach said, "But you're going to be the curator of the museum of the exhibit." So all of a sudden, I had a big project.
yes, you did. Yes,
She
you did.
committed she committed two of the bigger rooms in the old city hall for an 11-month exhibition. So now I had to find the other way to get that statue back was to find family members of the Donovan family to write to the nuns and say, please give back our grandfather's statue. And I um, was able, with the help of Neely Nelson, I was able to find um, a couple of the last two surviving 90-year-old grandchildren of J.J. Donovan, one of whom clued me into a great treasure. So the excitement began.
Yes, and you ended up with a wealth of material. I mean, a trunk full of well, I guess it wasn't still in the trunk when you got it, because which is
Now,
a good thing. If they'd left it in the trunk, that would have been terrible.
actually, it just occurred to me, I have a picture here of the trunk, which there's the trunk, a red leather trunk, a steamer trunk that Donovan and his wife took on their various trips around the world. And um, it was in a basement on the waterfront of Sag Harbor, New York, Long Island. At any rate, um, I was able to contact the family member who had it, and it was his daughter had apparently, JJ's daughter had, in 1937, had come out to help her father in his dying days. And she apparently loaded that trunk with all of the family papers, and there were scads of them, and shipped it to herself in Chicago. Now, 2 generations later, it's in Sag Harbor, where I found it. Fortunately, the Riggs family were wonderfully generous, and they gave the whole thing to me. And it is all now at the state archive, being controlled and protected by the people at the Center for Pacific Northwest Studies, which is an adjunct of the Western Washington University Library. But
Yep.
in that trunk were 42 diaries. JJ started writing a diary in 1872 when he was 14 years old. And he wrote a diary every day of his life thereafter.
I know it's 65 years of diaries, right? I think is what it was. 60. So that's and
we only have 42 of them, but
the span, and he went through so many different periods of history. So it's not just about, his life, but he talks about things that were happening in the country at the time, and, going to the centennial celebration. General, William Tecumseh Sherman visiting his school, visiting his class.
Meeting President Grant.
Yes. But the nice thing was this took you everywhere. You went to Sag Harbor. You also then went to Ireland, right?
Well, all we knew about the Donovan roots was in one page of a family Bible that indicated that Donovan's grandfather, Dennis Donovan, and his grandmother, Julia Donovan, were born in Skibbereen, Ireland in 1806. And then it listed there are 10 living children and their birth dates. That's all anybody knew. Nobody in the family knew anything more than that. So I wanted to go to Ireland and find out, what are their roots? Were they cobblers? Were they ironmongers? Were they dirt farmers? Were they rich? Were they poor? And so I just got on an airplane and went to Ireland and got lucky.
I love it that you did that. and you did get lucky. Holy smokes. What was the name of the woman who she took you to the cemetery?
Margaret Murphy. It's come to find out, Skibbereen is the southernmost town in Ireland, very bottom tip of Ireland.
Okay.
And it was also one of the very worst hit places by the terrible famine, the potato famine. Mm-hmm. So there's a heritage center museum in Skibbereen dedicated to telling the story of the potato famine. And they have a genealogist on their payroll. It's a tiny little museum, and I only saw one person in the place, and that was Margaret Murphy. So maybe they only have one employee, but she was wonderful. And so she eventually, after a day of research, found out, could tell me exactly where the 1 acre that the Donovan family rented was, and where they were buried. And at the end of the day, she said, if you can wait for 2 days, on my day off, I'll take you there. So what a wonderful, she was marvelous.
Wow.
So I stood on the very ground that J.J. Donovan's father had left 187 years before I stood there.
Yeah. Wow.
Amazing.
Wow. Well, so let's talk a little bit about J.J. Donovan, the person, and also about his life, about the people close to him. Something that was very surprising to me reading this book was the love story that's in this book between he and his wife Clara, who went by Nikki.
Right.
There
Her
was,
last name was Nichols.
yep, her last name was Nichols, and through these letters, I mean, that you had all these diaries, but you also had these personal letters that contained
In,
and just the sweetest, most heartfelt, loving, loving missives between these two. It was extraordinary. I was so surprised.
well, it's a wonderful love story. By the way, in the trunk were 2,000 personal letters, all handwritten letters in their envelopes with 1 cent stamps or 2 cent stamps on them. Did you ever wonder where the term "I'll give you my 2 cents worth" came from? It's because that's used to be the postage amount.
Okay, okay, that makes
At any
sense.
rate,
It
at
makes
any
sense.
rate,
Sorry,
yeah. So we
had to do
got
it.
the trunk here,
Hmm.
and or the contents of the trunk, and Gail Helgo and I, for almost a year, every morning Gail would come up and she and I would read letters and read diaries and annotate, write down what we thought was the important part of the story.
Hmm.
And so that's where we got the love story, really. And it's when they were 15 or 16, they were going to the normal school in Plymouth, New Hampshire. They had one of the very nation's first normal schools, just like we used to have a normal school here.
Right.
And well, JJ was smitten. He fell in love big time.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, he was an Irish Catholic, the son of illiterate immigrants. And she was the daughter of Puritan heritage whose family had come to America in the 1600s. And her family, some of her uncles and aunts were lieutenant governors and important people in the New Hampshire government. So she was a blue blood, and he was, and the Irish in the 1860s and 70s were at the bottom of the social scale. It took them 12. Oh, and she was a Congregationalist.
Hmm.
He was an Irish Catholic. Catholics were looked at askance in those days in conservative New England.
Hmm.
It took them 12 years to resolve their issues and commit their love.
Yes. And if you don't mind me reading a very very short
Go
a
ahead.
letter from Nikki to JJ. She finally, and this is in 1883, so they still had a while before they got married. They still had a number of years, I believe. But at this, that clearly they've been writing back and forth, and
JJ's out in Montana building railroads in the Wild
right,
West.
right, yeah, because he starts a long career with the railroads. And she signs off this letter to him. It is time that I say but a word more. I had not meant to tell you, underlined, but I must. I can't look beyond this, but I love you, Nikki. Which for the time and for the circumstances in which they've found themselves in their sort of forbidden love, for her to just declare that in the letter like that was just, it was so beautiful to read.
Well,
And there's oh,
and
go
then
ahead.
his letters in response and his diary uh, declarations afterwards were marvelous.
Yes. And he writes, he wrote her a Valentine 5 years later, and this Valentine is so sweet. Um, Nikki, love lit my soul with its bright sunshine when first I saw you, dear Valentine. Love, though I never dared make a sign nor even send you a Valentine. Love that was with me in every clime and meant you always, sweet Valentine. Love and beauty and joy are mine, for your heart, dear love, is my Valentine.
Did you ever get a letter like, oh, I won't ask that? Well,
I
it's
won't answer.
But what you have just read and said is what is so fascinating about this man, because he was a civil engineer,
Hmm.
and he was, I don't think he was brilliant. But he was extremely diligent, and he worked so hard, and he was so good at what he did. And he ended up being an industrialist with mills and sawmills, and operated coal mines and railroads. So people think of him as a great industrialist, but I'm interested in him because he wrote poetry to Nikki, and
Yes.
because he was an amazing community man.
Hmm.
Um, when the Ku Klux Klan was rising and strong in Bellingham, it was J.J. Donovan who stood out and stood up and against them. And it was J.J. Donovan who said to the city, when they when they learned that the stream that ran from Lake Whatcom through down over the waterfalls would make a great park. It was for sale for developers, and
Hmm.
JJ said to the city, "This must be a park. Great cities have great parks."
Hmm.
He was a consummate community man and extremely generous. Well, Nicky was a Congregationalist. He was a Catholic. We have in his record that he gave $500 when they were building St. Paul's Episcopal Church.
Hmm.
He gave that to Robert Welch, who was raising money for the church. He was extremely generous, just a wonderful man.
Hmm. Yeah, he was so principled. When you talk about his stand with the KKK, and earlier than that, when he was working for the railroads and with the Chinese workers,
Ah,
he was where he was directed to essentially force this Chinese labor who had finished out their contract. They had finished their commitment, right? And his superiors or the owners of the railroad were saying, you need to make them work more, and no, you need to bring them. I can't remember exactly the
well,
circumstance, but at all
they're trying
costs.
to move them up into the snow country,
Hmm.
and they refused. And so he was told to move them, even at the cost of lives.
Hmm.
And he resigned. He
Yep.
gave them his letter of resignation,
Hmm.
which it was a great bluff, because the railroad folks said, "Oh no, we don't want you to leave," and he, JJ won his point, but he
Hmm.
was ready to quit because
Hmm.
he wasn't going to do what he didn't think was right. Great
Right.
man.
Yep. Yep. That's I don't know why I was so kind of surprised. I mean, I have of course heard of JJ Donovan, but I just didn't know anything about him, and I didn't. And when you were talking about what a great community man he was, and his words about Whatcom Falls Park. Um, he says that he said that parks are as valuable as streets, because he'd seen all the cities with parks, and how it's an essential part for humans to have green spaces like that. I have to say, Mr. Griffin, that this is really reminding me of somebody that I know who who has done a lot of community work, creating spaces for Bellingham, and I wonder. I feel like if you were contemporaries with JJ Donovan, do you just imagine that you two just would have been pals? Like you would have been working together all the time on there would have
Well,
been so many projects.
I have the strangest feeling. I've been on this journey with him for so long, and I've read so much of his letters and know so much about what he has done, and I feel a personal connection. I
I
really
believe it.
feel
I
I
absolutely
really
believe it.
feel as I know him, and if he walked into the room, we wouldn't have to be introduced.
Yeah.
It's great. Well, but you need to realize too, one of the reasons that he was so committed to this community, He came here in 1888 when around Bellingham Bay were four little towns: Fairhaven, Bellingham, Seaholm, and Whatcom. And in those four towns, there were a total of about 500 people.
Wow.
He was on the first city council of Fairhaven. He helped to write the. He was on the. He was one of the advocates of consolidating the towns into the town of Bellingham, and he pushed hard for that. And he was on the charter review committee to establish the charter of the city of Bellingham. And well, it just goes on and on and on. He believed in community, and in fact, when his partner, I forget the year for the moment, but it was when his partner Blodell decided to buy a bunch of timber in British Columbia and start another operation up there. He said to JJ, "You'll come with me, won't you, JJ?" And JJ said, "No, I've got plenty to do right here in my own community." He was the president of the Chamber of Commerce. He was one of the guys who promoted and got the Mount Baker Lodge built. It's incredible what the man did in his life.
Mm-hmm. And I love how, as I'm reading the book, and there's all these pictures of the houses, his house where he lived and the house where his children lived. And, all talking about Garden Street and how Garden Street was kind of where the prominent families lived. And they all lived kind of right down the street from each other. And I was looking at those. So I'm driving around Bellingham, seeing things in a totally new perspective, because I look at these pictures and I said, I know exactly which house that is. I've actually been in that house, in his house on Garden Street. I know that house. But
I'll give you a ride someday, and I'll show you where J.H. Blodell built his house.
Oh, that would be great.
Blodell Donovan.
Yep. Well, and also the other thing reading this book is the names, throughout this whole, for all of us, all of we Bellinghamsters, Donovan, Bennett, Blodell, Cornwall, Larrabee, Wardner, Cowgill, Mackenzie, Wilson, Deming. I have to say, for someone who moved here in the mid-90s, those are just all street names, or they were, but to me, I mean, it's just getting a frame of reference for all of these people is really wonderful.
It's kind of fun. Speaking of street names, there was a Julia in every generation of J.J. Donovan's family. His grandmother was Julia. His mother was Julia. That was an extremely important name. J.J. was given the job of the first addition to Fairhaven when they started adding streets to the south. So he got his own name in there, Donovan Avenue and Wilson Avenue.
Yep.
But the last street, the farthest south, he must have run out of names. He named it Julia.
Oh.
So, after his mother, his grandmother, his everybody.
Anyway, yep, all of them. Oh, that's great.
You'll never be able to drive there again without knowing that, without thinking about it.
Well, can you show the audience those great photos of J.J. Donovan? You had those black and white photos. They're really wonderful quality.
In the trunk were 3 or 4 steel printing plates, big ones, maybe 12 inches high. And I found a printer at the university, in fact, to take those plates and print pictures of Donovan that I don't think have ever been seen before. So that was JJ. I don't know, how old was he? 42 or 3 or 4?
Oh, gosh, I wouldn't venture to guess.
Here he is, a little bit younger.
Okay. Oh, handsome, strong jawline.
Always wore. All his life, he wore those Edwardian collars.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. You have another. Could you tell folks quickly the short story about the birch bark, about what he did?
Oh, well, when JJ was a young fellow, he worked as a waiter at a resort in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. And one year, he met an interesting guy named Charles Loomis. Loomis was a Harvard student, I believe it was, or was it Yale? One of the fancy Eastern colleges.
Mhm.
And he was a poet. And and he was also working as a summer job as a waiter in the restaurant. And they became friends. And Loomis dreamed up the crazy idea of putting his poetry in tiny little books made of birch bark. And he sold them for 25 cents a piece at the at the lodge and the gift shop, and they went like wildfire. So all of a sudden he had a business, and he needed somebody to get birch bark for him. So JJ, for 2 summers, made much of his money for later education by cutting birch bark for Loomis's tiny little books. And this is all made of split birch bark. I didn't know you could split birch bark that thin.
Wow.
And here he printed his.
Oh,
So believe it or not, I found this on eBay, and
what?
it was, yeah,
Wow.
and it was printed in 1882, and
Goodness.
probably birch bark that J.J. Donovan cut. Kind of fun.
Oh,
Once in a while, I have one other artifact that you might be interested in.
yes, please.
Uh, at some point in time, I think I mentioned earlier that he was extremely well read, and he had 3,500 books in his library. And I'm thrilled to own one of his books. This is Mark Twain's Roughing It, and there's the Donovan bookmark that
Wow.
was drawn by Elizabeth Colborne. Elizabeth Colborne was a Bellingham artist who was really, really good. The museum had an exhibition on her works a couple
Uh-huh.
of years ago, and there's a book out about her. Wonderful artist. Anyway, that's the Donovan home.
Oh
So
my goodness.
these are treasures to me.
Yes, they
J.J.
should
Donovan
be.
held this in his hand one day.
Ah, ah. Well, I know that we probably have folks who have some. I know that we actually do have some questions that people want to ask you. So I'm going to actually, if you're ready, I was thinking we could go ahead and open it up for a conversation with our viewers. Are you ready for that?
Sure.
Okay. Let's see. So I'm going to enable the chat, and let's see. The first question that we have is it's the funny one about pronouncing Fairhaven. I just heard you
Ah,
interviewed on KMRE, and you pronounced Fairhaven as Fairhaven instead of Fairhaven. Is everyone pronouncing it incorrectly? And if so, how can this horrible wrong be righted?
uh, I'm not sure what is the proper way to pronounce Fairhaven. I just call it Fairhaven. And if that sounds different, it's a great. Who cares how you pronounce it? Just go there.
Oh,
Go there
goodness.
tomorrow for the open air book signing.
Yes, tomorrow from 12 to 4. Let's see. Did you know that Loomis walked to Los Angeles to become director of the Los Angeles Public Library, noted in the book The Library? Did you know that about Loomis?
I did, and I also know that Loomis was an advisor on Native American Indian issues to Teddy Roosevelt. Yeah, he
Oh,
was a,
wow.
he matured to be an important and interesting guy. He was interesting as a student.
Huh. Wow. Um, I would like to know what you think J.J. Donovan would make of how about the kind of the booming construction explosion that's happening in Bellingham and has been happening for a number of years. Uh, I I'm curious to know if what he would think about how the price of land has and property has gone through the roof. What do you think he would make of today's Bellingham?
Um, you need to understand a person in the context of the year he lived in, or the years he lived in. JJ was a builder, and he came to the west and to Bellingham Bay when it was nothing, and he spent most of his life building things.
Mhm.
Uh, and so I I suspect that he would have been, with that background, he would have been a supporter of growth and construction and building and make it bigger.
I noticed that at one point he paid $1.04 and $1.55 per lot in Fairhaven in 1891.
He got a tax, that was on a tax sale, I think, but because before that they were probably going for 2 or 3 thousand.
Okay.
Uh, but um, you know, I paid I paid $14,000 for my first house, and so I would he would feel as I do, shocked at inflation.
Hmm.
It's hard to remember what a dollar used to be like.
Yes, that's true.
No difference, I suspect.
Yeah. Well, can you tell us a little bit? How many children did JJ and Nikki have?
They had
Three children,
three
right?
children, and
And
the first child was a daughter who married the boy next door.
mhm,
His name was Craven, and they moved back to Chicago, and he became a prominent lawyer for specializing in railroad law, apparently, which was big in that time. And the second child was Jack, was Joseph Jr. And Jack got an education. He became a civil engineer as well, and came back and worked for Blodell Donovan Lumber Mills, ending up being the vice president. He replaced his father, who retired in the 30s. And then there was Philip, who he was the third son. Philip had a variety of businesses, including he was the Cadillac dealer in the building that is now the Bellingham, the food co-op.
yep,
So
I love the photo of that in the book. That's
yeah,
I love the picture of that building. It looks a lot bigger in the picture than
with all the tires stacked in front.
yeah, it's great.
Unfortunately, most of his business activities were done just prior to the Depression, and most of them failed in the Depression.
Hmm.
So uh, his business life was not too good.
Well, and then Jack had an unfortunate
Oh,
marriage.
tragic.
Yes. He
Well, he
also
had a
married kind of the girl next door, right? He married Geraldine.
yeah. He married the girl next door too. She was a beautiful, beautiful gal. I think they had a fine marriage for a while, and they had a child, their first Donovan grandchild, who the JJ and Clara Nikki were really smitten by, and they had a terrible auto accident where their car rolled over a roadster, which I presume is a soft top car,
Hmm.
rolled over on ice, and little Jack was crushed to death. His parents weren't,
Hmm.
so that was really tough. Um, and then in later years, insanity struck Geraldine, and she ended up having a lobotomy. I didn't write about that in the book
Oh,
because
I didn't know that.
the book is about JJ and not about the kids, but it's a tragic story. She had a lobotomy. She lived many years after that
Mm-hmm.
in the Jack Donovan house on 15th Street. In fact, I grew up just a house away And my mother used to have tea with her from time to time, rarely, but from time to time. And
Really?
she was, she was kind of happy and not all there.
Huh. Oh
Back in
my
the day
goodness.
when they did lobotomies. Ooh,
Right. Right.
or,
Oof. Uh, well, can you tell me, so for folks who might be wondering, so I presume that probably there are some people in the audience who have read Fairhaven, a history. Um,
I hope.
is there much crossover of material, or is Donovan's diaries its very own thing,
Oh,
standalone thing?
well, no, there has to be crossover
Hmm.
because Donovan was so important in the building up of Fairhaven.
Hmm.
He was hired by Nelson Bennett to build the railroad from Sedro-Woolley to Fairhaven, which fueled the Great Fairhaven boom,
Hmm.
and so there has to be some crossover.
Sure.
Hopefully, from a different perspective.
Yeah.
Like, did you know that I don't think I wrote in Fairhaven that in 1890, when the nuns came to start St. Joseph's Hospital, by the way, another thing JJ did, he raised the money for the first hospital, and he was on their board. He was their business advisor for the rest of his life.
Oh my goodness.
So St. Joseph's Hospital is JJ Donovan's hospital, along with those nuns.
Hmm.
Uh, but they arrived in Fairhaven in the midst of a typhoid epidemic,
Right.
when 23 people died.
Hmm.
So uh,
Hmm.
there's a lot of stories to tell about Fairhaven.
Yes, that's a whole other book,
Yeah,
which,
which
by
is
the way,
done.
we do have for sale at Village Books and will be
There
available
you go.
tomorrow if you want to come
I
down to the
would.
store and purchase
And
and
I'll
get your book
sign
signed by
for
the
you.
author. Yes, exactly. Um, one last I want to ask on an unrelated note. Would you tell us a little bit about the book Beulah? Because I love the story behind the story of Beulah.
Well, my folks had a summer home on San Juan Island, and well, that's what Beulah tells us. At any rate, we we uh, found a nest of baby crows, three
Mhm.
crows. The mother was dead. We cut down a little tree, and my neighbor boys took two of the crows, and my sister and I took one, and we raised the crow to maturity
Mhm.
and had the most incredible experiences with it. Like the day it followed me to class. I went to the campus school, and I was in the junior high school, and the junior high school was in big old main building, the old main building. I think on the third floor. We'd been out playing touch football and PE, and I heard a crow call, and I recognized it was Beulah's voice. Crows have individual voices, so I said, "Beulah, Beulah," and the crow came out of the tree way high up on the ridge and landed on my wrist and climbed up and sat on my shoulder as she always did, and the boys were all pretty amazed. Finally, we had to go back to class, so I shooed Beulah away and walked a block back to Old Main. And an hour later, maybe a half an hour later, there was a tap, tap, tap on the window. And there was Beulah. She had been going apparently from window to window in Old Main looking for me. As I opened the window, put her on my wrist, brought her into the class, and introduced her to all the class.
Wow.
60 years later, when there was a campus school reunion, people were asked, "What was your favorite memory in the campus school?" And one girl wrote, "When Brian's crow came to class."
Oh,
Anyway,
that's such an
I adore.
extraordinary story, but crows are they're such
They're
extraordinary
so
creatures.
intelligent, and so I had all kinds of fun experiences with that brief experience with a crow.
Hmm.
Eventually, we let her go. She just went back to the wild. But I
Oh, she
wanted to. Oh yeah, you got to get to the end of the book. So, and the last time I saw her, I hadn't seen her in 2 weeks. she was living up on Seaholm Hill with the rest of the crows, and I lived down on 15th Street. And one Saturday afternoon, I heard crows way up high. They were drifting down, probably down to the waterfront to find something to eat. And just on the whim, I hadn't seen her in 2 weeks. Just on a whim, I yelled, "Beulah, Beulah!" And one of those crows folded its wings and dropped right down and landed on my wrist. And that was it. We had a nice little chat, and I rubbed her under her beak. She liked that, and kissed her and sent her off, and I never saw her again.
Oh my goodness.
So
wow.
I've told the story so many times, and so many people liked it that I thought I better write it.
Well, that one is also going to be available tomorrow. when folks want to come by and get their book signed by you. Again, just so that everybody remembers, that's tomorrow from Saturday from 12 to 4. You're going to be, weather permitting, you're going to be at the Donovan bench on the corner of Harris and 11th. But if the weather's not so great, we may bring you back to and you can sit next to Mark Twain on the bench in front of Village Books where it's covered.
I'm going to wear my rain gear. I even have a big umbrella. I'm going to strap it to the bench.
All right.
But I might have to take you up on that.
Yeah. And we can't go without you telling us just a little bit about your ukuleles.
Oh, well, about 10 or 12 years ago, I got hooked on ukuleles, and I've been a woodworker forever, so I started making them. And now I'm working on my 145th ukulele. And I brought one down if you'd like to see it, Claire.
Yes, please. Absolutely.
Please. Well, this is a tenor ukulele.
And, gorgeous.
And it sounds pretty good.
Oh. That's beautiful.
So I sell them, strangely enough, all over the world. I've sold them in France and Denmark and England and Australia and all over the country. People find my website. So,
well, I'm going to put your website in the chat right now.
Show me the way to go. Tired of That's enough.
I think that is a perfect way to end. So thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who has been watching this evening. This has been so special. And again, the book is the Donovan Diaries. The author will be in Fairhaven tomorrow, Saturday, the 26th, from 12 to 4.
Here's one without a stripe across it.
Thank you. And we hope that we'll see you all tomorrow for our socially distant book signing outside, 6 feet apart. So everybody's saying thank you, thank you, thank you. All right. I think on that note, we're going to sign out. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Village Books.
Okay. Bye-bye.
The beating heart of Fairhaven.